Thank you very much for being back with us. We now have the pleasure of having Amita Baviskar, who is professor of environmental studies and sociology and anthropology at Ashoka University in Delhi, in India. So Amita Baviskar has a rich scholarship, notably on the notions of the commons in Delhi and how this question of commons, of course, get seized by the ecological question. But right now, we are going to talk about the notion of heat. How does the heat, the experience of living with the heat, evolves and is perceived differently through the Indian society? So thank you very much for being with us. And the floor is yours for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you all for being here. It's been a long day, but I've been really struck by how engaged everyone has been. So thank you for staying on to listen to me. I should begin by saying I'm not a historian. I'm a sociologist, anthropologist who works on issues in the contemporary world. But I think we can't understand the present without seeing how the past shapes us, as it sits on our shoulders, and as we reflect on how things used to be in a context that is swiftly changing. The past also opens up doors for critique and to imagine other possible ways of living. And what I'm going to reflect on today is the experience of heat in North India, which is, as you know, a very hot place. This year, the heat began early and continued without a break for 5 months. This was the hottest March in 122 years, and it was followed by, and in this season of March, which is usually early spring, very pleasant weather, we had prolonged periods when the maximum temperature was continuously above 40 degrees Celsius, which was more than 4 degrees above normal, meeting the Indian Meteorological Department's definition of a heat wave. In the last few months, people have experienced some of the highest temperatures in living memory. Scientists have warned us that we can expect more of such extreme events. Around the world, climate change is caused by global warming as greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, accumulate in the atmosphere and trap heat. Since the Industrial Revolution, but most especially since what has been called the Great Acceleration of the 1950s, the increasing rate of burning fossil fuels has made the planet hotter. Warmer air, oceans, and lands have together created longer and hotter heat waves, more frequent droughts and wildfires, heavier rainfall, and more powerful storms. These severe forces of weather, what in English are called the elements, heat, wind, rain, cold, have always been with us. Much more than mere weather, this term, the elements, suggests agency and power, extreme forces that must be endured, like the Mistral. And it is that agency that works with and against humans, other living beings, and non-living elements. That is the subject of my talk today and the research that I'm currently doing. I ask, how are the elements experienced by different people? How have these experiences changed with global warming? And what do these changes tell us about how people imagine themselves and how they live their lives? This is a huge topic, so I am going to talk about only a very small slice of it, and that is urban North India, especially the city of Delhi, where I live and work. Each place is particular, and these great global forces may affect them all, but in ways that are also distinctly local and conjunctural. These global forces get tangled in specific histories and geographies. So I do not attempt to generalize, but I do hope that you may find evidence and arguments that resonate with the places and peoples that you are familiar with. So, along with other cities and towns in North India, Delhi has lived with hot, dry summers for centuries. Has city dwellers' experience of heat changed over time? How do they make sense of it? What do they do to deal with it? So I'm going to address these questions by drawing on participant observation and extended interviews with residents who varied by their income and occupation, by their age and their gender, and the length of residence in the city. I have to also say that this research was primarily conducted in the last 2 years during the lockdown, where fieldwork was not really possible. So it's a bit slimmer than I would like it to be, but I'll be continuing it. So first of all, almost everyone that I spoke to noted that Delhi had become hotter. But almost no one, not even highly educated people, and I talked to an engineer, a dental surgeon, a professor of literature, none of these people attributed Delhi's becoming hotter to global warming. Instead, they identified proximate, nearby causes closer to home. They said Delhi was more populated, more crowded and congested. It was more built up. There were fewer trees. It was more polluted. So in effect, what people were describing is what has been called the urban heat island effect. And these factors, congestion, crowding, fewer trees, more concrete, all these factors do contribute to heat and to people's sense of feeling oppressed and claustrophobic. But it startled me that no one related their experience of rising heat to cumulative emissions from years of capitalist industry. What my informants' responses did show is that the cultural experience of heat has changed as global warming has interacted with Delhi's pollution, patterns of work, housing, and travel, and with cooling technologies. So here I'm going to argue that these dynamic factors and forces are interdependent. They are entangled in ways that are hard to unravel and separate. They create new lifestyles and habits of body and mind. They also create new inequalities and vulnerabilities, feeding vicious cycles of deeper exploitation and ecological distress. Let's talk first about memories. Longtime residents of Delhi agree that summer in the city has always been brutal. From May to July, the sky would pour down heat, and the air and the earth would store it. That baking stillness would be briefly broken by an andhi, a dust storm, which would whip through, swirling dust and bringing a spatter of rain, but the next day the heat would be back. Middle-class people looked forward to summer holidays when families would retreat to hometowns and villages. Many well-off Punjabi families would holiday in hill stations set up by British colonial people looking to escape the heat of the plains, places like Shimla and Nainital and Mussoorie. But for everyone else who couldn't escape the heat, summer had to be suffered and endured. And yet, looking back on summer as it used to be, a surprising number of older people said how much they enjoyed it. There were special summer treats like mangoes and melons, cucumbers and lychees. There were special summer drinks, mango panna, a spicy jaljeera, bel ka sharbat, ruh afza. There was a feel of ice sliding down a dry throat. And then there were summer smells, the damp fragrance of khas or vetiver. These khas woven mats were hung on doors and windows and were sprayed with water, creating dim, perfumed interiors. The warm, wet earth smell, a scent of water from a clay pot, a surahi or a matka. People remembered how the courtyard or the rooftop terrace would be washed each evening with buckets of water, and charpais or string beds and mattresses laid out for sleeping under the stars, everyone together. Yes, it was hot, but there was no point in complaining. You just had to deal with it. For everyone except the very poorest, dealing with the heat meant adopting specific micro-practices, many of which are still in use. Waking up early to take advantage of the cooler hours, retiring indoors in the afternoon for a snooze, wearing loose cotton clothes, open slippers, and sandals on your feet, bathing twice a day, eating light food, drinking a lot of water, and underlying these common sense taken for granted techniques for staying cool is an elaborately worked out theory of the body as needing to be in harmony with its environment. Ancient principles from Ayurveda and Unani medicine organize how the body and its external ecology should be balanced. So food is classified in terms of its qualities, its guna, its effects on an individual's humors, bile, phlegm, I've forgotten the third one. Okay. And food also classified also in terms of its physiological effects, whether it is cooling or heating. So interestingly, cold beer is heating, but cold lassi or a yogurt drink is cooling. So it's not to do with the temperature, but the way it affects the body. What one eats and how one lives has to take into account an individual's temperament and character, place, and season. And these precepts are underpinned by the idea of the individual as intrinsically and intricately linked to her environment, always open to its influences, needing to attune herself to climate and flora and fauna, soil and water, staying healthy in body and mind by following the rules of the season. And summer was a season. It had its finite time. It would end when the rains arrived in July. One just had to wait it out. And while you did, there were small pleasures to beguile you. The golden shower of amalta's trees and flower, the flamboyant blaze of the roadside gulmohar, and sometimes the keenest pleasures were the smallest ones. To come home grimy and sticky after a journey on a crowded bus and having a bath, that first mug of cool water on one's head, bliss. And even those who slogged in the rain, heads covered to ward off the dreaded loo. The loo is the name for a hot wind from the Thar desert that swept the city in the afternoons. Even people who worked in the midday sun could sneak a short respite in the shade. So masons on building sites, rickshaw pullers, the postman, they labored on, a moist gamcha or headscarf wound around their heads. They say, oh, but we manage, we're tough. Is bhatti mein pak chuke hai. We have been baked hard in this oven. To live and work in the heat and to make light of it was to show one's mastery over one's own body, disciplining the mind to rise above material discomfort, to make a virtue of necessity. And one had to do it only for a season, and a season always ends. Those summers are now gone. Now summers start in March, not in May. They create new records in the intensity and extent of heat. Each year seems hotter than before, and there seem to be more heat waves. However, climate scientists don't altogether attribute the frequency of such heat waves to climate change. Instead, they point out that in Delhi, the full blast of solar radiation and warming from greenhouse gases has been moderated by the cloud of air pollution that sits above Delhi. So we would be even hotter if it was not for the insulating effects of our own emissions. What we do have instead are two other effects. One, there's been a rise in summer minimum temperatures, the nighttime temperatures. Delhi's nights are warmer. People toss and turn on their beds, sweating and sticky. They wake up feeling unrested, sluggish, and irritable. The second thing is that relative humidity in May has increased strongly since the 1970s, in large part because Delhi is very well watered. It has a lot of avenue trees and parks that are plentifully irrigated. So people keep complaining, it's not the heat I mind so much, it's the humidity. And humidity does indeed kill, because when it's hot, the body cools itself down by sweating. Dry heat allows sweat to evaporate and cools down the body. But when the air itself is gravid with moisture, it cannot do so. That's when the chance of a heat stroke goes up. If untreated, a heat stroke can be fatal. The elderly with their frailer bodies are most vulnerable, as we know from the devastating heat wave that killed more than 70,000 people in Europe in the summer of 2003, many of them here in France. In India, the people most at risk are not only the elderly and infants, but also those who work outdoors for long hours, who are malnourished and weak to start with. And this includes construction workers, rickshaw pullers, street vendors, delivery men, and hundreds of thousands of others. No matter how used they are to the heat, how toughened their bodies, this is too much. This is more than what anyone can bear. When higher temperatures are combined with higher humidity, most cooling methods fail. For almost a century, electric fans and desert coolers have been the chief means for actively cooling spaces in Delhi's dry heat. And the term active cooling is used to distinguish these technologies from what is called passive cooling, or architectural devices such as screens, thick earthen walls, verandas, and ventilators that prevent heat from entering a building or help to dissipate it. So this is what is called a desert cooler, and they work by throwing moist air into a room, and as that moist air evaporates, it brings the temperature down. They're very, very easy to assemble because there's just one small pump, a motor, and this metal box, and they're very affordable. But rising humidity makes coolers useless. And then the only technology that can cool is air conditioning. Until the 1990s, air conditioning was a luxury that only the elite could afford, and that too only sparingly. Middle-class people experienced air conditioning only fleetingly in cinema halls and on trains. This changed dramatically in the last 30 years with the liberalization of the Indian economy, setting off what might be called the Indian Anthropocene. A huge increase in the use of fossil fuels actually started from the 1990s and not from the 1950s, as has been the case with North America and Europe. So during this period, 1990s onwards, Delhi's population has grown massively in size and density. The city has attracted migrants looking for better work, education, opportunities, and their incomes have risen, but the rise has been far greater for already well-off sections. Wider economic inequalities divide citizens. What unites them is their shared aspiration to improve the quality of their life. A common measure of how people evaluate their improved circumstances is the ownership of consumer durables, what are called white goods by economists. Thanks to liberalization, the cost of domestic appliances and private vehicles, cars, motorcycles, has fallen relative to middle-class incomes. For the lower middle classes, consumer loans now make it possible to buy what would otherwise have been a really big-ticket item beyond their reach. And those with even smaller budgets can turn to the thriving market in used second-hand appliances. So the spread of air conditioning in Delhi since the 1990s has been made possible by these new means which are available to people, but also because electricity is now more reliably supplied to most sections of urban society. Earlier frequent power cuts and smaller sanctioned loads meant that power guzzling air conditioners, ACs, couldn't be run regularly. Not only for homes, but even owners of restaurants and shops and offices didn't think it was worth their while to invest in ACs. Now, uninterrupted power is available day and night in most neighborhoods, at least in Delhi, and even during the evening hours when there's a huge surge in electricity demand due to people going home and switching on their ACs, the power doesn't go. So none of this cool comfort, of course, would be possible without vastly increasing coal mining and dam building in other parts of India and also in the world. But the dispossession of Adivasis who inhabit lands which are taken over by, for mining, and Adivasis is the term we use to talk about indigenous people, the fact that this mining devastates forests, the pollution that is caused at the point of production, the enriching of big corporate firms at public expense, all these links between the city and its resource catchment are rendered invisible, buried somewhere along the power lines. They are not even a spectral presence when we press the remote button to switch the AC on. There's an interesting study by Mike Levian of a village in Rajasthan in northwest India where the government acquired land to build a special economic zone, basically gave the land out at subsidized cost to corporate firms. And in this process of land acquisition by the government and its transfer, some high caste landowners became wealthy from land brokerage and from speculation. They smugly summed up their rising fortunes by saying, now we're sitting in the AC. And what that means, what that phrase sums up, sitting in the AC, is that's the good life. Not toiling in the field, but sitting in an air-conditioned room. But for a number of people, however, an AC is not just a symbol of having arrived, the ultimate luxury. An AC is necessary to how they live, work, and travel in the city. That's because air conditioning works in tandem with other technologies, enabling certain built forms and lifestyles, such that one can't have one without the other. Oh, sorry, that was the slide meant to go with the mining of coal and the devastation of livelihoods. Talking about technologies and how they intermesh with each other so that you can't take them apart. Take housing. The best example of colonial tropical architecture is the Lutyens' bungalow. It's beautifully adapted to climate, but it also occupies space in a supremely privileged way. Then there is the older vernacular architecture of the 16th century Mughal-built Shahjahanabad, the old part of Delhi, densely shaded, low-rise buildings where communal courtyards and rooftops offer access to cooling breezes. But these bungalows and these rooftop barsatis are not for most people. The 1 BHK is. 1 BHK stands for 1 bedroom, hall, kitchen. 1 BHK, 2 BHK, 3 BHK. That's the language of property brokers in Delhi. The 1 BHK is a home that the lower middle class can hope to own. A tiny bungalow, a tiny flat in a multi-storied apartment block. And this BHK dream house is actually an unventilated box with no usable open spaces. It would be unbearable without an AC. So also with workplaces, instead of buildings adapted to local climate, there's increasing standardization of building materials, techniques, and designs from around the world, and architecture of steel and glass and concrete, materials that signal modernity, but that actually absorb much more heat. In these closed-up offices labor workers who can't function without air conditioning. This idea of air conditioning as essential to the workplace was most enthusiastically taken up in Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew, its long-serving prime minister, who propelled the island to prosperity, said, I quote, "Air conditioning was the most important invention for us, perhaps one of the signal inventions of history. It changed the nature of civilization by making development possible in the tropics. Without air conditioning, you could work only in the early morning hours or at dusk." He said, "The key to public efficiency is to have air conditioners everywhere." So we can see in Lee Kuan Yew's words how the notion of a productive citizen is combined with deeper colonial ideas about forms of embodied civilization and the degenerative effect of living somewhere hot. And these ideas also inform business architecture's new regime of what has been called thermal monotony, which has spread rapidly between countries with very different climatic conditions. An air-conditioned office lets one inhabit a professional style, which means a Western dress code, business suits and closed shoes for men and women. Bodies are styled to a standardized aesthetic, and no one sweats. To reach this air-conditioned office, one must travel. And there again, an AC interposes itself as a necessity. To travel in a car in Delhi is to sit in a metal box on tarmac that radiates heat, surrounded by the reflective glare from glass and metal, breathing exhaust fumes. What can one do but roll up the windows, switch on the AC, and join everyone else in heating up the planet? Even as more and more people spend longer in air-conditioned spaces, an everyday experience that, while it varies a lot with income and occupation, actually includes a fair share of what has been called the precariat, the people who are on very low wage, insecure employment. There are actually, even though more people are therefore exposed to air conditioning, there are many who are ambivalent about it. Older people especially said that the kind of coolness it created was unnatural. Many old and middle-aged complained that sleeping in the AC made their joints pain. They got coughs and colds. Prolonged exposure would make one fall sick. To go in and out of air-conditioned spaces was to experience two seasons, summer and winter, in the same day. They said the body could not cope. Several people also pointed out that air conditioning has a kind of insidious effect. Exposure to air conditioning recalibrated one's internal thermostat. Temperatures that were tolerable earlier now felt uncomfortable. One of the people I spoke to said, she said, like the internet, air conditioning inserts itself into your life so that once you're used to it, you cannot imagine life without it. Earlier, it wasn't like this. When the power would keep going off, you knew you couldn't rely on the AC. So you learned to bear the heat. Now, she said, I've been spoiled by the AC. When I'm without it, I feel its absence actively and acutely. I feel deprived, unquote. Some people expressed wariness about such dependence. Many limit their AC use because it's expensive, but several others do so because they don't want to be sequestered from the heat. They want to feel that they can deal with it, that their bodies and minds are disciplined enough to prevail over their environment. Such an attitude is informed by a Spartan ethic, a belief that denying oneself comfort makes one stronger. Austerities are, after all, still respected in a country where fasting is a regular part of religious observance. Others simply believe that there's a rightness to experiencing a season and adapting to it. For a younger generation that has grown up with ACs, there's no such ambivalence about the technology. It's what they want, not only for being productive, but also for being social, for relaxing with family and friends. Older middle-class people may regard this dependence on the AC as the younger generation having become soft and loose and self-indulgent, a physical as well as moral decline. But young people do subject their bodies to self-discipline. Think of the exacting regimen of working out in the gym, of dieting and grooming. It's just that they don't see braving heat as a worthwhile physical or psychic challenge. They'd rather stay indoors with their friends in climate-controlled environments. Tim Winters calls it a subtle yet discernible form of agoraphobia, a growing fear about the outdoor environment as a space of contamination and risk from pollution, crime, bodily discomfort, and impurity. So increasingly, upper-class sociality turns indoors, leaving the streets and other public places more segregated than ever. Okay, last 3 paragraphs. What's it like outside the cool confines of air-conditioned spaces? It's a lot hotter because ACs throw out heat, blasting hot air outside and making it hot for everyone else. They have also contributed to global warming, not only because they run on fossil fuels, but because they use chemicals, first Freon that depleted the ozone layer, and then HFCs, whose global warming potential can be hundreds of thousands of times more than that of carbon dioxide. And finally, they make life hotter by having redefined people's sense of thermal comfort. The social experience of heat has been redistributed. Caught in the middle are those working class people whose jobs place them in air-conditioned environments. Security guards in cash machine kiosks, shop assistants in malls, cleaners in corporate offices who move between cool comfort in their workplace and suffocating heat in their homes. As several of them told me, their bodies and their minds are conflicted. As more people extend their use of ACs and others aspire to do so, the demand for power is reaching new heights. The specter of power breakdowns is truly frightening. Even as there's growing political pressure to generate more power, most of it from burning coal, there are power cuts, and inevitably they target the poorer neighborhoods first, even though those neighborhoods don't consume as much electricity. This is what happened in Chicago during the horrific heat wave of 1995, leading to disproportionate deaths among poor, elderly African Americans, their social vulnerability mapped onto the city's spatial geography. Now imagine a night in Delhi in July, temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius and 60% humidity, mosquitoes whining around your ears, and not even a fan or a whiff of breeze to relieve the heat. In seeking cool comfort, the well-off are warming the planet as well as their fellow city dwellers. I haven't spoken here about other aspects of very hot weather, more aridity and drought across the region, the river Yamuna in Delhi drying to a trickle, a deeper crisis of drinking water, fueling a demand for more upstream dams, more displacement, more landslides and floods in the Himalayan ranges. Delhi's troubles leave deep and permanent ecological footprints on the countryside. What I will leave you with, these are the effects in the mountains. What I will conclude with is a pair of images from colonial India. The Mem Sahib at ease in her airy chamber, the scrawny-chested pankha pullers outside, laboring to keep her cool. We who use ACs are a little bit like that Mem Sahib because we are kept cool by extracting services and resources from other peoples and other places, even as we make life less livable for others. And yet, so neatly is the logic of air conditioning nestled into all other aspects of life that a life we desire, a life that we are compelled to live, that it is impossible to imagine walking out. These are the deep structural binds that hold us captive. Thank you.
a huge thank you for this really important presentation that you just gave to us. We're going to take a few questions, but we will focus with really few questions so that we can extend more during the roundtable. I'll just allow myself to ask one about this image that you're showing here. We see that it's two different frames. Is it, I imagine that it's the same person who did them to go together, or it's a collage that you created?
It's a collage, yeah. Oh.
Wait for the mic if you don't mind, and stand up, please, for the question.
Let's see. So early, about in a third of the way into your talk, you made a quick reference to dams, and I wanted to add, my understanding is the glaciers are failing, and you don't really get subterranean water from the mountains, and I'm wondering if, I mean, that's a compounding factor. It's not divorced from these issues at all. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. And it's, you know, it seems to be, there's not even going to be enough for irrigation, let alone drawing power from the mountains.
Yeah. You've touched a subject that's really close to my heart. My PhD work was on a movement against a large dam in central India on the Narmada River. And the question of dams, the sheer folly of large dams, especially when rivers, the flows of waters in rivers are becoming much more uncertain. It's just stupid. I mean, it's mind-blowing. But there's a lot of money to be made from dams. And the government regards dams in the high Himalayas as a sort of win-win situation because the areas are sparsely populated. So you don't have the possibility of large numbers of people needing to be resettled somewhere, or they're coming up and mobilizing and protesting. So even though you're right, the glaciers are receding, snow melt is the chief form of water in Himalayan rivers, which means all of North India. They're still making dams. They're making dams even though the great fear is of triggering more landslides and earthquakes because the Himalayas are a geologically active region. And so there's all sorts of problems, but there's just so much money to be made from these that that kind of just flattens all the evidence that has accumulated over the years showing that these dams should not be built. Yeah, I'm happy to go into the details with you, but it's a long and sorry story.
Well, we'll go further into it with a further conversation. There is one more question by Loïc.
Excusez-moi, je vais la poser en français. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un peu plus des solutions jugades, low-tech en fait, pour se prémunir de la chaleur? Parce que je sais qu'historiquement, il y en avait en Inde qui avaient été développées. S'il vous plaît.
It's a question about low-tech technologies as you...
Yeah. Some of those I talked about simple things like, why do I wear this, right? When it is hot, I can cover my head with it. When it's really hot, I can sprinkle some water on this. I can use it to wipe my sweat. I mean, these are the sorts of age-old things that people have always used to stay cool. And so it's not just bodily practices when you step out into the sun, when you stay home. It's also to do with the kinds of spaces you spend time in, deep shade, preferably under trees, and so on. The difficulty is that a lot of these methods aren't enough because the temperatures are now just too high. The humidity is crazy. So, part of me wants to say, as do a lot of people who work on low-tech adaptive architecture and living practices, that we need to, rediscover and reintegrate these kinds of technologies into what we do now. But the big question is this enough? So then one must think about, well, is it possible to restrict air conditioning in certain kinds of ways so that it is available in a more sustainable way, in a more equitable way. Maybe only public places should have priority when it comes to being air conditioned, like the metro stations, like public buildings. Maybe poor people should be given access to the metro stations at night so that they can sleep better. I mean, if it could happen in the Second World War that people were sleeping, sheltering in the, in the London Tube, we can do that. I mean, this also is an emergency. So I didn't have time to go into all the kinds of different things that people are trying to do to find solutions that bring together things in a kind of bricolage that in Hindi is called jugaad, sort of making do with little bits of this, that, and the other. But I'd be happy to talk about it more with you later.
We'll have time to develop this argument, which is absolutely key, the role of like low-tech innovation and how do you split the zones of comfort versus the zones of intensive heat. Again, a huge thank you for this talk. Thank you, Amita Baviskar. And now...
Thank you.